Good afternoon. This is Eric Ogle, the CDBG Program Director with the Office of Community and Rural Affairs. This is the webinar for the Broadband Designing Your Committee webinar. And with us is Bo from Purdue, and I'm going to turn it over to him to kind of lead this discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. I really appreciate the opportunity to join all of you today to talk about a program, obviously, that many of you have been working on for the last few months since you got word from the Lieutenant Governor that you got selected. I can tell from some of the names on the list of participants. I'm probably no stranger to some of you, and that may either be good or bad. I'll let you decide that. But again, I'm really happy to be part of this important initiative that the Office of Community and Rural Affairs has launched across the state. What I want to do today is, first of all, I want to say congratulations. You've made it. It's like anything else, you're really happy when you put a proposal together and you get the word that it got funded, and then you say, oh my gosh, it got funded. Now what do we do? So the hard work is ahead of you, and I know many of you have been really thinking about it. So I want to say, congratulations. You're part of the pilot effort in the state, and we're going to learn from you. Not only are we going to provide, hopefully, some valuable information and guidance to you, both Purdue and OCRA, but more importantly, we're going to need feedback from you about how we can make what we're trying to do even more meaningful and more effective. So your feedback, since you're a pilot effort, it's going to be really important. Some of you probably know these three characters pretty well at Purdue, our Purdue team. Of course, I direct the Purdue Center for Regional Development, but also head up the Extension Community Development Program in the College of Agriculture. So I'm Bo, as you can see at the far left on your screen, Roberto Gallardo, who many of you already got introduced to with his recent webinar he did with you on Broadband 101, and Michael Wilcox is my colleague here at PCRD and the Assistant Program Leader for the Extension Community Development Program. All three of us will be really working closely with you in the coming weeks, if not months, with your broadband initiative. As you can tell, I'm the youngest of the three here from that list. I wish that were the case. But we have five groups, five recipients of the OCRA Award, and I do like to make this. I know Eric was right. Please silence your phone so that we don't have a lot of background noise. But I would like to first do a shout out to each of the five of the recipients, and if an individual or individuals from the team are on the call, feel free to say hello and tell us who you are, because I think you are going to have to get to know each other pretty well, because you're kind of lean on each other to learn from one another about some of the work you're doing with regard to the broadband readiness effort. So Dale, anybody from Dale, Indiana with us this afternoon?
Yes, we are. Cindy Morrison and Lisa Wyatt.
Good afternoon. Welcome. Glad to have you on board. Anybody from English or Marengo and Milltown? If you are, unmute your phone. Otherwise, you're not here. Anybody from this? Okay. How about Greene County or any of our communities that are part of Greene County? Nobody from Bloomfield, Jasonville, Switch City, or Worthington? Okay. How about Marshall County? Anybody from Marshall?
Yeah, this is Jonathan Lice from the town of Culver. I'm here with Judy Stone.
Glad to have you. Anybody else? Okay. And how about Stark County? Okay. It's a cold day out there, so a lot of people probably have some problems here with regard to getting on board. Obviously, they may have some family issues that prevent them from being on board. But anyway, of course, Eric is taping this, so we'll be able to give him a chance to catch up. So anyway, welcome. I want to kind of give you a little bit about what we're going to cover today. And as you probably know, some of you, we've been working in Spencer and Crawford and Marshall County with some of the work we've done with OCRA in partnership with OCRA in the past, like the Hometown Collaboration Initiative. So we've gotten to see some of your counties and some of the communities that you're from, but we're really looking forward to work with you on this dimension. We'll talk a little bit about the planning grant. I'm going to go through this very quickly because, the assumption is always that you've been part of the team. You pretty much know what this is all about. But either I wasn't sure if everybody on the call today will have been part of designing the application or whether you've got some new people on board. If it's the original members, I always forget what I put into a proposal, so it's probably not bad for us to kind of reflect on what that planning grant was all about. Then I'm going to talk about building a team. I know you've been working on it already, but I want to kind of give you some pointers, some things to think about how you build a really cohesive and integrated team, a representative team. Then I'm going to talk a little about, I'm going to give you a couple tools that you can use to look at your planning committee and how well it aligns with some of the again, the representativeness of your community or the county. Talk a little about roles and responsibilities. We want to make sure that gets clarified so you kind of know what Purdue's doing, what OCRA's doing, what your planning committee will be doing and whatnot. And then we're going to very briefly talk about what's upcoming with regard to some sessions that we'll be presenting face-to-face in your own communities. So let me go ahead and I'm going to ask, by the way, I'm going to ask Eric to kind of keep an eye on all of you in case you have I know you said wait to the end. If it's something that's really earth-shattering, please let him know, and he'll probably go ahead and interrupt me, but otherwise we'll take it at the end. The planning. Go ahead, Eric.
We can if you do have a question that you think needs to be addressed immediately, then we can use the chat function.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, and Eric will be glad to let me know what your question is. The application that you've submitted last summer is essentially these were the kind of four major things you were asked to look at. One, what geographic area are you targeting? Of course, it had to be an area that has really relatively unserved with regard to broadband. So you've been able to look at that. Talk about a little bit level of broadband service in your community. Is it 10-1 or whatever? Is it 25-3 or is it essentially absent? Why were you interested in the broadband planning grant, and make a really good case as to why your community is a right recipient of this? And finally, what efforts have you made in the past to try to enhance your broadband infrastructure? So those were the four major questions. Of course, you had to do a little bit more information as well, but that was the meat of what your proposal was about. So it was on that basis that you were awarded the planning grant, and we really now want to share with you how you can move forward as a team to really begin to build that community, that broadband readiness plan. So let me talk to you a little bit about the committee. In my experience, and unfortunately that's many years, there are things that I have found, and many of you probably have found, to be very successful committees. What has made them really work? What's been that thing that made them function effectively? One is really the whole notion of representativeness. A committee that's constructed of just a small handful of people in the community who don't really represent all the diversity of voices makes it challenging. So we want to make sure that the perspectives of different components of your community or your targeted areas is heard. Second, to help the local people gain a better understanding of the issues that you're addressing, and we're going to talk about how you do that. Third, it's important that you give consideration to people who have different perspectives, who come from different backgrounds, different populations. What do the elderly think about? What do young people? What do people of working age and prime working age think about? Whether those are different different socioeconomic backgrounds, or even people who are minority groups. If you have minority populations in your community, really critical to give license to these opportunities for these individuals to share their opinion. Sometimes I have a little thing called survey. You'll see that one way we do that is to try to reach out to people and get their input through some type of survey. The fourth thing is to is how do we enhance your ability to get the job done? And some of you have phenomenal skills and experiences. Others may say, you know what, we know each other, but we're really struggling with how we function effectively as a team. And finally, is to look at the whole range of possible strategies and actions. And one thing I think we're going to try to harp on, and I put especially those that bring benefits to the whole community. And what I mean by that is that this broadband is a topic that could really, really be tough because you do have special interests who are interested in certain things with regard to broadband. Your community is really going to be charged with the responsibility of making decisions that will bring benefit to as many people and groups as possible. So it's not, we don't want to say we don't want to narrow it to just one entity in the community, but again, be as comprehensive as possible in terms of the benefit. So we put together here as ideas on the kinds of groups and organizations and individuals who would be a really good fit when it comes to your broadband planning committee. So BPC is obviously the acronym for Broadband Planning Committee, which is what your committee, your team, your community is going to have to organize if it hasn't done it already. So we want to obviously reach out to people who from the economic sector, businesses and industries. We want the philanthropy to be there. One of the things we have in Indiana that many states would love to have is community foundations that are there in every county. So our investment in community foundations is pretty important. Obviously, local government because they have policy making activities, they're very critical. Regional planning and local economic development groups, they're obviously very interested in broadband. The educational sector, healthcare, both education and healthcare are obviously a major beneficiaries of having really good broadband. The banking institutions, the potential funders of some investments in your community. Then we have the internet service providers and the rural electric membership cooperatives. The REMCs are very rural based. So many of you have very small communities, and so the REMCs become important players, as well as some of your key providers, internet service providers. Nonprofit, which ones should those be? That's really up to you. Are there logical nonprofit organizations that would be important to have on your committee? And then finally, we say key populations, and I'm going to hopefully give you a chance. Roberto talked about some of the work and his Broadband 101, or he will be when it comes to your community. He's going to talk about different socioeconomic groups and the extent to which certain characteristics of your population may either facilitate or promote adoption of broadband or may be impediments. If you're elderly, if you're low income, if you have limited education, those are the population characteristics that make it really tough to adopt a broadband, so we have to be aware of that. Or people who are, young people, obviously are big adopters of broadband and really as applications. So we want to look at these different populations and making sure their perspectives are recognized and appreciated in your broadband planning efforts. So we got a handout that we're going to share with you, and it's a tool that helps you look at, let's look at our broadband planning committee. To what extent do our committee membership, do our members somehow fit into these different categories I just shared with you, and determine whether we have any major gaps. There are some components of our community that simply aren't at the table, and that's what we want to do, is have you kind of do a real assessment of your team. And so what I've done is and by the way, you will be getting this through Eric. You'll be getting a copy of both you'll be able to get access to the PowerPoint as well as these two worksheets that I'm going to give you. One of them is this one, who's already represented on our team. And I gave you kind of a mock-up. What would that look like? Of course, I don't know your names per se, so I just put person 1 through person 12, assuming you have a committee of 12 or so members. And then you begin to indicate, person 1 is actually, he or she is a member of our business community. He may be the head of CEO of a particular company in our community. Then you can see how, this is how it is. Just really literally identify different groupings that these individuals represent. And as you can see, some people have more than one check mark or X because I may be a member I may be a business person, but I also happen to be part of I'm on the school board or happen to be really active in the educational system. So the key is to try to find people who might be able to represent more than one one particular interest area, though it doesn't have to be, that's not required, but it's always nice when you have people who can fit into more than one of these categories, because it allows you to have all the groupings of your community or the representativeness there with a small number of people. 12 to 15 is probably a really good number as a committee. I guess if you want to make it larger, that's up to you too. But if it gets too small, then you really aren't probably going to have everybody at your meetings, every meeting that you really need to have to make some of the decisions that need to be made. So anyway, this is just a thought about how to take an assessment of your committee. So the question becomes, after you've done that, who's missing? Do we have some category or some population that simply is not represented? And if that's the case, well, who should we invite? Should we invite somebody to be part of our broadband planning committee and try to do that as soon as possible so that they can be there at the subsequent sessions that we have scheduled in your community? So there are groups missing, and we've given you, we'll have a little handout for you to as a team to compile, and let's I'll tell you in a minute how it looks like. But once you build that list, you got to figure out, okay, can we come to an agreement on which ones of the, you might have a list of 10, 15 people. Well, you can't have that big of a number to invite. So who are the individuals from that list of 15 that we really want to reach out to initially? And you may come to an agreement on 4 or 5 that you want to invite. Then decide who's going to invite them from your team. When does that have to be done? By what deadline date? And if the person does say, you know what, I really would be interested, then again, give them the information about the upcoming meetings. And I put together this little worksheet. Again, it's always nice to have something to jot down. So you have the list of individuals you're thinking about, put yes or no. You may ultimately say, okay, yes, we want to reach out. What area of the community do they represent? They may be a certain population subgroup in your community that you haven't had represented, like young people or elderly. Who on your committee is going to reach out, and when do you want that particular task to be completed? Again, it's kind of a way it holds you hostage in a way to making sure this gets done. But somebody has this, your community leadership or your committee leadership will make sure that people are getting that job done, and that's really, really going to be critical. We try to think about how you might organize yourself, and we've done this with Hometown Collaboration. We found this to be very successful, so we've tried to adapt it for the Broadband Planning Committee. And the green color on this diagram is those of you who are going to be spearheading the Broadband Planning Committee. Again, that could be 12 to 15 people or so. Then we're going to talk a little about the core committee, and you may decide that we want to have a smaller number of people from our planning committee who are going to be really involved in the day-to-day activities, and I'll share with you a little bit more about that. Then you have people in the community. You want to give them a chance to to have input, and so that's the third element, the larger body in that circle. And then OCRA and Purdue will be there along the way at all levels to be involved in helping support your work and to try to do whatever we can to provide information, technical assistance, or any kind of training that you think would be helpful in your efforts to really build a successful broadband readiness plan. So let me talk a little bit about what the responsibilities are, and hopefully this doesn't mean we're going to lose anybody on the planning committee, because it's good to have up front what you're going to be doing. I know many of you are really, really busy people, but when somebody asks you, hey, would you be willing to serve on a committee, the first question you typically ask is, what do I have to do? What are my responsibilities? And a lot of times we fail to do that. We fail to have that kind of outline for a person, and it's hard to get somebody to jump on the bandwagon if they don't really know what they're supposed to be contributing to the committee. So we've tried to make this as clear as possible as to what we see, at least how we see the role of Broadband Planning Committee. You have the ability to fine-tune this, to add other things that you think are relevant to the responsibilities of your committee members. One of them, of course, is to show up, to be there. You can't do very much on a committee if you don't show up. So really to be an active participant participant in the team meetings is really, really critical. Second of all, you've been invited because you have both personal and professional knowledge that committee really needs to hear. So coming to a committee and being quiet is not helpful. We want you to be there and weigh in and share your perspectives. Third, we're going to provide, Roberto's going to provide some data on your broadband footprint. We're going to provide some really good data on your community, things that really help you get the better understanding of what's out there. Now, you've done some of that examination in your original application. There's going to be a deeper dive and some data that you're going to find really, really quite helpful. Fourth is we want you to try to get input from local residents, your colleagues, your friends, and there'll be both formal and informal ways you can do that. But informally, it's not a bad idea to also get feedback that you can bring to the committee. But you'll also be involved in helping provide a more systematic way to get input from local people. Then when you get the data and information from local residents, you got to figure out a way to synthesize that and say, okay, what does this mean? Well, that will be the basis upon which you begin to think about building a plan. Or at least if you're going to have a contractor who builds a plan with you, it's a whole lot better for you to be in a position of knowledge, and you really can guide and direct this as opposed to just standing on the sidelines and letting them tell you what to do. We want this to be really have your fingerprints all over this report, all over this plan. And the best way for that to happen is for you to really get a sense of what the information, the data are saying. And then keep local contacts informed. Some of you are going to be representing different organizations or different communities. You may be a government leader, or you may be a leader of the industry or nonprofit or the community foundation. We want to make sure that people with whom you communicate are kept informed about the work of your committee. Seventh is serve as a positive voice. There's nothing that tears away at the effectiveness of a committee when people start backstabbing each other or start talking negatively about the work of the committee. So that positive voice is critical. If there are problems, then sure, fight that out amongst your committee. But we sure don't want to hang our dirty laundry out there for everybody. We want to be able to work that out as a committee. And then finally, I want to repeat, keep the interest of the whole community in mind. What can we do in our broadband readiness plan? We'll do our utmost to make sure that we're bringing benefits to as many people as possible and minimizing the cost. So that's the key thing with regard to the Broadband Planning Committee. Because this is a lot of work, then we talk about the possibility of you creating a smaller core of people from your committee, from your broadband planning committee, who will handle a lot of they could probably be the ones on the front line making sure new members are recruited. And by the way, you're going to have, and we'll be able to talk to you about this later on, it's only natural that in time you begin to lose some members. So we want to talk about how do you have this pipeline to be able to bring in new members to minimize any interruption in the good work your committee is doing. So we're talking about this kind of succession planning. We'll talk about that later on. But we want to talk about how do we recruit new members, who deals with all the logistics in terms of we're going to meet, how do we make sure everybody on a committee is fully knowledgeable about when we're meeting, where we're meeting, and whatnot. We want to try to help the core committee be the ones who gives leadership to make sure that the public is given a chance to provide input, and that could be done by a variety of ways. The broadband readiness plan, if you're going to be contributing to the development of that plan, it's really, really hard to do this with 15 people's voices. I mean, people can all weigh in, but then ultimately it's going to be a small group that kind of puts, pencil to paper to help build that plan, or to at least guide the plan if you have a contractor. And finally, somebody's going to keep OCRA in the loop about what's going on, or keeping us at Purdue in the loop to make sure that we see how things are going and what kind of help may be provided whenever you may need it. But again, Roker's going to need to know how's it going. And I think, Eric, that's something we'll probably have to talk about, whether they submit quarterly reports or just updates informally. That's something that OCRA will decide. But you probably know that, Eric.
Yeah. So actually, because OCRA is doing the more working with you in conjunction with the communities on this, you'll actually be working directly with your community liaison, and they'll be the ones keeping us up to date. So basically just make sure your CL knows everything that's going on and keep them actively involved in the process.
Thank you, Eric. That's a very very important point. The CLs are really critical, and they'll definitely be there throughout the whole. We suspect will be there for the whole 9 yards here. Okay, how about community residents? Well, what do we do? How do we get them involved? Well, you may decide up front that as you're building this broadband readiness plan, you want to get informational meetings out there. You may want to go to some of your civic organizations or public meetings, whatever. You know from your broadband readiness plan you're going to have evidence that you had public hearings or somehow reached out to the public. Part of it is this information early on to let them know what you're doing. You may want to do a community forum. It doesn't, or some what we call, we have the ability to work with you on how to build a focus group. How do you identify different groups and be able to hold meetings with them to get their input on broadband, some of the issues you're going to be dealing with. You may decide you want to do a broadband survey. That you want to get out to the public, either by, I know with Hometown Collaboration we've done online surveys. It's kind of hard if you don't have broadband, but there are also hard copies. It's amazing how many people who respond to this survey because they were so happy that somebody actually asked for their input. So think about whether a survey is the right route. But the key is you've got to find a way to get feedback and input from the public, and I know that's something that OCRA is extremely interested in, and the CDBG funding is really important that be demonstrated. So all the stuff will provide, or you can ask them to provide feedback once you develop a plan, and before you finalize it, get them to weigh in. Ask them to share their perspectives with regard to the goals and strategies that you've articulated. So, as I said repeatedly, Purdue and OCRA are working in partnership on this, and I'm giving you some thoughts about what we at Purdue will be doing. If history is any indication, I think Eric will agree, this is probably just a small list of what we're probably going to be doing because we work really closely with Eric and our OCRA colleagues, and that list can be longer because we're in this together. So we're going to give you data, county data, like a more of that demographic and socioeconomic and economic snapshot, which you need to be part of your broadband readiness plan. We're going to help list or identify, basically GIS map key anchor institutions and other assets, which you're going to be asked as a broadband planning committee to help vet, to validate, and you're going to want to add stuff that we know, things that we may have missed. Roberto, with his work, will talk about the broadband footprint, and that'll be a really good conversation he'll have with you. And then we're going to do some sessions, which I'll talk about in a minute, again, to help support the development of your broadband readiness plan, and we're going to provide technical assistance and other information activities along the way, including if we have grant opportunities that we've identified, we'll share that with you as you get your broadband readiness plan kind of close to fruition. And then on the OCRA side, obviously, the community liaisons will work closely with you on the implementation of the planning grant you currently have. They'll provide information along the way, as the liaisons will. Provide guidance on your readiness plan, and I know that they're also interested in whether you might want to pursue a broadband ready community certification if you don't have it yet. Those are all things that OCRA is really, really well suited to help support. And they, too, will let you know about grant opportunities that are available either at the state level, federal level, through foundations, whatnot. But both Purdue and OCRA are committed to doing all that we can to get information in your hands with regard to grant opportunities that will hopefully bring the resources you need to make your broadband readiness plan a reality, put that plan into action. And so what's ahead? Let me tell you a little bit about what we have planned. You've already had that Broadband 101. This is kind of just like mine is more talking about how you build a really, really good, productive and active team. Then and the next face-to-face is we're going to first come in. Michael Wilcox and I will come in, and we're going to review a little bit about what we talked about today, your composition of your broadband planning committee, and what have you decided in terms of potential adjustments, or do you have all the mix of people there, or are you having struggles with being able to really have the kind of representation you want. Hopefully you'll have a chance to have those worksheets developed and prepared and completed, and we'll talk a little bit about that up front. And then we're going to talk a little bit about planning 101. Very generally, how do you build goals and strategies? Because again, that will be things that have to be incorporated into broadband readiness plan, but it's good for you to kind of get a sense about how those things should be developed, because if it doesn't look like your plan has got that kind of really good information in there, then you are in a position to say, hey, this is just not cutting it. We have to do a little bit. We have to articulate our goals and the way we're going to reach those goals in a little bit more detail, and so that we can make sure that we're meeting the metrics that we want to meet. Roberto will be doing the one on broadband data and looking at information on broadband footprint. And then we have a couple optional activities if your committee decides down the pike that this is something you'd like to do. To get public input, do you want to do a focus group? If so, Michael and I will come in and give you the nitty-gritty, the nuts and bolts of doing a really good focus group. And it's something that we would like to empower you to know how to do so that you can carry out those focus group sessions in your community. And then if you'd like to design a broadband survey, then Roberto is really our expert. He can really put together a very, very nice survey in partnership with you that could then be distributed through your community, whichever community or county, whatever your geographic area of interest would be. Roberto is going to be able to help design that survey, and we'll work with you about how strategies to get that disseminated if that's what you would like some help on. And all I can say is that, as I indicated at the very beginning, the committee has got to stay involved and be there at meetings. But I have found through the years that any plan is going to be really successful if the members stay involved and are really involved and stay involved in that process. Nothing harder than having this interruption in membership, because it just kind of disrupts the flow. So not only does it help you get your job done well, it also builds relationship. It builds trust. And I think all of you will agree you've been in committees where maybe that trust wasn't quite there, and that really impacted the effectiveness of your work when you don't have that trust. So that trust happens by you just basically working through all this stuff, having disagreements, coming to agreement on how you proceed, and again, recognizing different people's perspectives, honoring those different perspectives, but finding a way to build a plan that all of you can get behind and support from this point on. So with that, it's your turn. I know I took about 30 minutes, which is what I thought it would take. Hopefully this is useful to you. As I said, Eric will have both the PowerPoint and the 2 worksheets available for you to access, but I would love to hear any questions you may have for either Eric or me that you'd like to have addressed. So let's open it up, if we can, Eric, to any questions you may have received or any questions that'll be typed in the chat box in just a second. Hopefully everybody knows how to get to the chat box.
So